Hi everyone, so to introduce this week's concept, what I want to do is I want to start with a short exercise. So right now what I want you to do is think of a number between 1 through 5. Let me give you 5 seconds to think of that number. Okay, so now keep that number in mind. So now let me give you an expression. X squared minus 6x plus 8. Okay, so what I want you to do with your number that you chose, I want you to plug in that number for this expression. So if you picked x equals 4, I want you to plug in x as 4 and then solve and see what number you get. I want you to pause this video for a minute and try it right now. Okay, so the number I picked that I decided to do was number 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let x equals 3. And then I'm going to plug in my number for x squared minus 6x plus 8. And let's see what answer I get. So I'm going to say this is 3 squared minus 6 times 3 plus 8. So x is equal to 3. So now let's solve it. 3 squared is 9. 6 times 3 is 18. And then plus 8. And then let's go from left to right. 9 minus 18 is equal to negative 9 plus 8. Negative 9 plus 8 is equal to negative 1. Okay, so this is the answer that I got because I chose number 3 as my number that I picked. I guarantee though that some of you watching this video may have gotten 0 as the answer. And if you pick the numbers x equals 2 or x equals 4, you should in fact get 0 instead of negative 1. And let's just confirm with one of those numbers. So I'm going to let's say I chose 2 as my number instead of 3. So if x equals 2, then we have 2 squared minus 6 times 2 plus 8. 2 squared is 4. 6 times 2 is 12, then plus 8. And then let's go from left to right. 4 minus 12 is negative 8, and then plus 8. And it turns out that this is 0. And so for people watching this video, maybe you chose 4 instead of 2, and hopefully you're able to determine that if you plug in 4 for x, you should also get 0. So today's lesson is basically on how do we know, given this expression here, how do we know which number would give us the answer 0? Like for example, let's say I gave you x squared minus 8x plus 15. So instead of just testing all these numbers out, how do I know which number would give us 0 as our answer? Would it be x equals 1, x equals 2, x equals 3, x equals 4? There's all these numbers, and if you keep testing all these numbers, that's a lot of time that you spent. So here's a way to do this kind of the short way, which we kind of covered from last week. We have to use the concept of factoring. So let's try factoring x squared minus 8x plus 15. So I'm going to put this on here. Okay. Okay, so our goal here is to figure out which x would give us 0 as our final answer. So x squared minus 8x plus 15, which x will give us 0. And let's do what we did last week, was we can factor this by writing this as a product of two binomials. And to do that, I introduced something called the Xbox method. So let's do that right now. So let's make the area model. Okay, so from this we know x squared goes here, we know 15 goes here, and we know that these two will have to add up to negative 8x. So these are the two boxes that we need to figure out. So first, x squared 15, let's multiply these together. And then let's create the x. And then here, 15x squared on top, and then the negative 8x on the bottom. All right, so the question becomes what two numbers multiplies to 15 and adds to negative 8? I encourage you to pause this video and see what you get. But it should be negative 5x, negative 3x. Okay. Negative 5 times negative 3 is 15. Negative 5 plus negative 3 is negative 8. Let's plug that in into the boxes. Okay, Okay, so now let's fill in the outside. So what goes on the outside? So what times what is x squared? That's x times x. X times what is negative 5x? That's negative 5 here. That means this is negative 3. Okay, so x minus 5 on top, x minus 3 on the bottom. So now we rewrite x squared minus 8x plus 15 as x minus 5 times x minus 3 equals 0. Or okay, so now, look at what we just did. So we turned x squared minus 8x plus 15 equals 0 into x minus 5 times x minus 3 equals 0. And so the question is, why did we do this? Well, remember our original purpose is to figure out which x value will give us 0 as our final answer. So by turning x squared minus 8x plus 15 equals 0 into x minus 5 times x minus 3 equals 0, this will become a lot easier to determine which x is 0. But in order to do that, we actually need to introduce a concept called the zero product property. Okay, so zero product property basically states that if you have two numbers that multiply to 0, that means one of those numbers, at least one of them, must be 0. So let's say if we have a times b equals 0, if a times b equals 0, then either a equals 0, so either a equals 0 or b equals 0. Okay. Or both. Okay, so if a times b equals 0, then either a equals 0 or b equals 0 or both. And so think about what that means. So if you have two numbers that multiply to 0, that means one of them has to be 0, because any number times 0 is 0, and also 0 times 0 is 0. So how would that help us solving this problem? So let's actually, so we have x minus 5 times x minus 3 equals 0. So how would that help us? Well, let's look at this. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite x minus 5 times x minus 3 equals 0. Okay, so we're going to let x minus 5 be a, and we're going to let x minus 3 be b. So we're going to treat x minus 5 as a number, and we're going to treat x minus 3 as another number. So x minus 5 is a, x minus 3 is b. So the zero product property again states if a times b equals 0, then either a equals b or 0 or b equals 0 or both, which means if we translate it to this problem, this means x minus 5 is equal to 0 or x minus 3 is equal to 0. Okay, so x minus 5 times x minus 3 equals 0, that means x minus 5 equals 0 or x minus 3 is equal to 0. So how would we solve this equation? Well, let's go back to first semester. So we have to, x minus 5, we want to isolate x. So we have to do the opposite of minus 5, which is plus 5 on both sides. So we get x equals 5. And then x minus 3, we have to add 3 on both sides. X equals 3. So it turns out that now, because we turned x squared minus 8x plus 15 into x minus 5 times x minus 3, this is a lot easier to look at and figure out which x value will give us 0 as our final answer. If we just look at this, it's kind of hard right away because there's a lot of numbers that you can test, and maybe you don't know which numbers they are. But if you factor it and turn it into this, it becomes a lot easier, but we need to use something called the zero product property to do that. So this is how we solve quadratics. Let's do one more problem together. Okay, so let's say I gave you problem 2x squared plus 15x minus 8, and our job is to figure out which number will give us 0 as our final answer. And so let's use the Xbox method again. Okay, so we know this is 2x squared, this is negative 8. Okay. Let's multiply these. Negative 16x squared on the top, 15x on the bottom. So pause this video again, take some time to think about this yourself, but this should be negative 1x and 16x. Okay, so negative 1x and 16x, so let's put that in the boxes. You can also just write negative x as well. Now let's fill in the outside. So what times what is 2x squared? And that's 2x times x. Can I put 2x here? No, because 2 doesn't divide negative 1. That means I have to put 2x here. That means x must be here. And then 2x times 8 is equal to 16x. 2x times negative 1 is equal to negative 1x. So now that we have the length and the width, we can rewrite this as x plus 8 times 2x minus 1 equals 0. Okay, so this is our new equation, x plus 8 times 2x minus 1 equals 0. So we turn 2x squared plus 15x minus 8 into x plus 8 times 2x minus 1 equals 0. Now we can use the zero product property. If we treat this as a and if we treat this as b, that means one of a or b must be 0 or both. So we're going to make two different equations, x plus 8 equals 0 or 2x minus 1 equals 0. So now let's solve this equation. So subtract 8 on both sides. X equals negative 8. That's one solution. And then 2x minus 1. This is two steps rather than one step because of the 2. So remember, first thing we do to solve this equation is we need to do the opposite of minus 1, plus 1 on both sides. So this is 2x equals 1. Now, how do we solve 2x equals 1? We do the opposite of times 2, which is divide 2. So x is equal to 1/2. If you want to turn it into a decimal, it's x equals 0.5. So this is basically how we can solve quadratic equations. So if we turn this into this form, this will become a lot easier to find which x value will give us 0 as our answer.